Hi, this is Nikki of Nikki Hearts Cards, and I am so excited to be here on the WOW channel with you today. We are going to look at images on watercolor paper and why clear embossing powder is my favorite way to do this. So we're going to talk about a few easy watercolor tips, but mainly how you emboss on watercolor paper to make it the most effective. So, for the first tip, of course, anytime you're heat embossing, you want to add a lot of powder. And this is especially true with watercolor paper because it has a texture to it. You want to make sure you really get a lot of powder down on the paper before we start stamping. I'm going to be using a sticky mat in this Altenew stamp wheel. It is easier to do this technique if you have some type of stamp positioner. Now this is going to be my first time using this stamp set. So you see that I'm rubbing on the stamp set, and this is called stamp conditioning. This will make your ink and your embossing powder look so much better if you make sure that you've got any residue off the stamp before you start stamping. Now with this stamp positioner tool, I'm going to set up the whole scene for the stamp, and then I'm going to use the plate on top to pick up all the stamps so that they will stay in exactly the same place. So once you have the scene in place, and I'm not going to stamp the sentiment on this one piece. I'm actually going to cut that out with die cuts, but I'm going to make sure that it fits how I've set up my card so that it'll fit right there in the scene. Then I'm going to use the stamp positioner. So this is the Altenew stamp wheel, and it's got a plastic face, and then I'm going to pick up the stamps like this and flip it over so that we can start inking them up. Now you could do this with your WOW embossing ink, but I want my images to show up on the paper, so I'm going to stamp with black ink, and then we'll use our clear embossing ink over it. Now one tip is that when you are stamping on watercolor paper is made to absorb liquid. So especially if you're wanting to emboss on it, you need to do the stamping a couple of times, which is why that stamp positioner tool is so much better. I actually stamp this image 3 times, and then I'm going to immediately take it to do the clear heat embossing. And you see after the first stamp that if you know this black ink, you know that is not dark enough and that it is getting absorbed into the paper. So I'm going to continue on. This is the VersaFine Nocturne again, and I'm going to do this 2 more times. Okay, here's the second time. You can see that image is getting darker. And then here it is after the third stamp. Now you could keep going if you wanted to make sure, but 3 worked perfectly for me on this. So now I'm going to use my clear embossing powder on this image. I like to use coffee filters to catch my embossing powder, but when you're doing a big panel like this, it would be perfectly fine to put down a piece of paper or something like that to catch your excess. So I'm going to tap this off really well, and then I'm going to look at it up close. I'll show you what it looks like. The image now looks a little cloudy because it's got that clear embossing powder stuck to it. And you want to make sure you don't have any little extra pieces. I'm wiping those off with my finger, but I really didn't have a whole lot because I did such a good job powdering this piece. So now we just heat it up, and you'll see I do front and back just to try to keep the paper from warping too much. That's not as big of a deal with watercolor paper because you're going to be adding water, which is also going to add to the warping. I'll show you how I flatten out my panels after I'm done with them. You can always tape them down to try to keep them as flat as you want, but I tend to just add some stuff to the back of the paper later that helps flatten this out. Now I'm going to grab a watercolor pan. You can use, if you don't have watercolors, you can use ink, anything, but these water brush pens, so this pen right here that I'm using has water that comes out, and having this embossed image right here just makes like a little well for that water. And so I can put the water in and then add little bits of color, and that just kind of spreads along where the water is. It's so easy, and it doesn't go outside my embossing image because I've created a little wall with that clear embossing powder that keeps it right here, which just makes this so easy. Now I'm going to zoom in even a little further so you can see how this is going. So I've done the purple. I feel like butterflies, I love purple and teal together. So I'm going to create the other one starting with the teal. And so I'm going along this edge where the little butterfly is right here and adding the teal. I added a little bit of water, but just brushing it up there. And you can see that it is so nice to have that edge to keep these little paints inside the wall of the embossing. There are a couple little spots on these images because of how the images work that have an open area, but it really helps with the embossing. Now I'm going to add some blue to this teal butterfly, and I'm just going to come in and add it so that I can kind of blend it in. And look at how nice, once again, having this edge is. You'll see when I start blending this out, I'm adding just a little bit more water, that I've got that nice edge where I can just run my little paintbrush up next to it, and it does such a good job at keeping the image inside those borders there. So I'm just adding a little bit of blue to this butterfly because I feel like all butterflies need to be kind of multicolored. And then we'll do our beautiful purple butterfly. I'm going to zoom in even more on the purple butterfly so I can be sure that you're seeing what I'm talking about. You see my wet paint with the purple, it's still got water there, which is good because you want it to blend with your next color. So I'm going to come in with teal as my second color, and you can see I got it a little too dark, so I'm adding some more water with this water brush, and then I'm using that edge to contain this area. So bringing it up and then just running up to the edge very easily, and it's staying inside the image there. And I'm going to complete the rest of the butterfly the same way so that it looks like this purple has faded into beautiful teal. Now, I am an amateur watercolorer, I will say, but if you pick the right colors, you use your clear heat embossing to kind of hold your image together, it is really quite easy and forgiving process. So highly advise the clear embossing powder for this. I did use the ultra fine clear embossing so that I get all these fine details. So I'm going to mention a couple of other things. So with this branch, I completely forgot to put my flowers on before I had heat embossed and done everything with the branch. Well, there's a couple of options with this. So I've got the stamps to go back and do the details of the flowers. With this kind of wispy look, if I was a great watercolorer or I was really confident in my flowers, I could just paint them on without doing an outline, but I really wanted to use the ones that were in the set. So I'm going to add some flowers, and I'm going to use the same black ink, which is okay with watercolor, but not worry about the heat embossing part. You could heat emboss if you wanted to. You just need to let your painting dry, add your powder again, and then you could heat emboss these. I really liked just putting them in black ink because I'm going to paint over that a little bit and be less restricted to the lines with this part of the painting. So I'll show you how that turns out. Okay, so here's how it looks. You cannot tell that that's not heat embossed down there unless you're looking at this card very closely. But what I mean with the flowers is I knew with the flowers that they're so tiny that I was going to probably go out of the lines and kind of thought that might be a cool look for the bottom. So I just did that regular black ink and actually intentionally went outside the lines of these flowers because I thought it just gave it a really cool, different look. We've got our butterflies that are all in their lines, and these are out. So you can do regular stamping with heat embossing. That's perfectly fine depending on the type of look that you want. If these were heat embossed lines, I would have that little ridge, and it would be a little bit harder to go outside the lines. It can be done, but it tends to want to confine your painting to inside the lines, which is why I like to use it. Okay, quick tip. I told you that I was going to do something to make sure this was a flat panel. I'm adding double-sided adhesive foam to the back of the panel, and it keeps your card front so straight. Now, I can't resist adding a little bit of enamel dots here and splattering with silver. Let's look at it up close. I know it's hard to see that silver, but it's so beautiful over the top of this, and I just love how it turned out. I hope you had fun creating watercolor cards with me today. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and find me on social media. I put out daily inspiration, and I'll be back on the WOW channel next month.